He laughed in my face. $50,000 of unpaid work, countless late nights, weekends sacrificed, and years of dedication. And he thought I'd just take it and walk away. But I didn't. Not yet. Not even close. That day, I realized that patience could be the deadliest weapon. If you've ever been cheated, undervalued, or disrespected at work, hit that like button and subscribe. This story isn't just about anger, it's about strategy, patience, and the sweetest revenge you'll ever witness. It was the early 2000s, and I had just joined a small startup. A scrappy, chaotic little company with 9 employees, a tiny office, peeling paint on the walls, and the faint smell of coffee and stress lingering in the air. But I loved it. Every day was a challenge, every problem a puzzle, every solution a victory. The office was buzzing, papers scattered across desks, phones ringing nonstop, keyboards clicking in hurried sync. The salary was mediocre, barely enough to live comfortably. But the work was intoxicating. I was learning skills that would carry me for life, gaining experience that no classroom or course could provide. I told myself this was an investment, not just a paycheck. I was building leverage, reputation, and knowledge for the future. The contract was simple. Fixed salary, no paid overtime. Reviews every 3 months, then annually. Standard, fair in theory. I trusted that my effort and dedication would eventually be recognized and rewarded. Little did I know how badly that trust would be tested. The first year passed in a blur. Projects, client calls, and late-night problem-solving consumed every waking hour. I stayed late almost every night, skipping dinners, skipping weekends, often skipping sleep. My colleagues joked I was married to the company, but I didn't mind. I was invested, and my passion fueled me more than any paycheck could. By the second year, I had successfully managed 10 solid clients, brought in new trials, and helped the company grow. Revenue began rolling in steadily. Yet not a single extra cent was offered for the overtime. I told myself it was okay. Recognition would come. Payment would come. The satisfaction of building something meaningful was reward enough. Every late night, every extra hour, every problem solved felt like another brick in the foundation I was building for my career. I kept a mental tally, a silent record of my sweat and effort, accumulating quietly. 3 years in, I thought my dedication would be acknowledged. Conversations about back pay started. I felt anticipation, excitement even. Finally, acknowledgement. Finally, fairness. Then came the offer. My chest tightened, my hands trembled as I read it. Equity. Less than 0.01% of the company. A company they valued on paper at hundreds of millions of dollars. I reread it. Surely this was a mistake. But it wasn't. This was their reward for my loyalty, my dedication, and my unpaid overtime. Anger surged like a storm inside me. This wasn't just about money, it was about respect. My sacrifices, my time, my energy, all treated as worthless. And they thought I'd just smile and accept it. I could feel my heart racing. My fingers clenched into fists. Every moment of injustice replayed in my mind. The weekends I sacrificed, the nights I stayed late, the times I solved impossible problems alone. I didn't argue. I didn't negotiate. I didn't beg. I handed in my resignation that very day. I felt a cold satisfaction. I still had untaken leave and a 1-month notice period. Legally, I could walk out immediately. And that's exactly what I did. The CTO, usually calm and confident, looked like he had seen a ghost. The CEO frowned, confused, maybe a little angry. My absence immediately created chaos. Projects stalled, meetings were delayed, clients were left waiting. I walked out calmly, the power finally in my hands. The next day, I sent an official, registered letter requesting my overtime back pay. The response was a flat-out rejection. I sent a second, more detailed letter, listing every hour worked and every email exchanged. Rejected again. The excuse was classic: no overtime. Bonus discretionary. I stayed calm. I consulted a lawyer. That's when the plan began to form. I learned about statutes of limitation, accrued interest, and penalties for unpaid overtime instructions. I asked my lawyer, what if we wait until 6 years and 11 months? Interest compounds daily. How much would that be? He calculated. $112,000 in interest alone. Add penalties. Roughly $135,000. Patience would make the ultimate weapon. Time would compound my payoff. The next several years, life moved forward. I got new projects, other opportunities, and let the company grow. They became more recognized, more confident, thinking they had gotten away with it. I stayed quiet, patient, watching, waiting. Every email, every rejection, every small misstep was evidence and ammunition. I watched as they thrived, pretending everything was fine. Meanwhile, I calculated the perfect moment to strike. Some nights, I wondered if I should let it go. Was it worth it? Could I take the easy path and move on? But then I remembered every sneer, every casual dismissal, every time they laughed off my contributions. I pictured their faces when I demanded what I was owed. I knew I had to wait. Patience, strategy, justice. Not revenge fueled by rage, but revenge executed with precision. And so I waited. Every day, silently. Letting time work for me. Letting the law accumulate interest. Letting the penalties build. The satisfaction was not in instant anger, but in the slow burn. I followed the company quietly from afar, watching their growth, watching their success, watching the CEO bask in his power and thinking he had escaped accountability. It fueled my resolve. Every minor error, every questionable management decision, every overconfidence became part of my mental ledger. I was preparing for the day I would strike, a day that would combine law, strategy, and karma in a single, perfect moment. By the end of part 1, the stage is set. Years of hard work, betrayal, and patient planning have brought me to the edge of something monumental. Part 2 will deliver the payoff. Courtroom tension, CEO panic, the recorded phone call, the legal reckoning, and the sweet, perfect satisfaction of revenge. He waited, you waited. Now the moment arrives. He thought it was over. He thought the small resignation, the rejected letters, the stonewalling had closed the door. He was wrong. This is where the quiet, patient plan becomes a storm. If this story hooked you from part 1, make sure you're comfortable, settle in. Part 2 is where the law bites. The phone call shatters arrogance, and a single judgment turns years of disrespect into a bill they can't ignore. The whisper of the courtroom doors, the rustle of papers, the faint smell of coffee and old wood. Those sensations are what I remember first. The morning of the filing felt ordinary, crisp air, a commuter crowd, the same city noises. But beneath everything, my pulse pounded like the engine of a car revving at the red light. Calm on the surface, wired underneath. I walked into the law office that day and sat across from my attorney. He was a steady man with gray at his temples and a habit of tapping, a pen when thinking. He slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were years of emails, the registered letters, copies of the equity offer that had humiliated me, timesheets, client confirmations, every piece of paper I had silently hoarded like ammunition. He looked up and said, "We proceed. We file." Filing wasn't dramatic. No gavel bang moment, no triumphant music. It was a click, a stamp, an electronic form submitted to the courthouse database. But the air changed after that click. I felt a new kind of solid under my feet, a feeling you get the moment you finally step off the cliff because the harness is secure. The summons arrived at the company address midweek. I imagine the first thing the CEO did was scan it and then drop the paper like it was hot. I imagine him thinking, "This will go away." He didn't know that the slow-burning interest I had set in motion was already arithmetically growing like a small, relentless tide. The phone call was inevitable. I had expected anger, threats, perhaps an attempt to negotiate quietly. What I hadn't fully anticipated was how ugly the panic sounded when a man, who's used to people nodding, finally realizes they might pay. He called me. That call is the piece of evidence that turned this from a civil tiff into a moral public reckoning. He started with bluster, a torrent of words meant to intimidate. He tried the classic playbook: blame, minimize, insult. He accused me of being greedy. He tried to gaslight the history. He called me ungrateful for everything the company had given me. His voice was a rasp of entitlement. I recorded it. I had decided to record every interaction after that initial rejection because I had an instinct, the kind of instinct that says, when someone becomes irrational, capture it. The recording captured more than words. It captured tone, the syllables that vibrate when someone is losing control. In the recording, you could hear him inhale sharply between sentences, the slur of anger turning into something pathetically pleading when he realized the law was not impressed by his ego. I did not shout back. I would not let him bait me into a losing posture. I spoke slowly, measured. "I've given you notice. I've asked for what I'm owed. You've rejected it. This is not personal. It's the law." He barked a laugh, the same laugh that had once dismissed my late nights, and the sound was now exposed for what it was: brittle, preemptively defensive. Later, my lawyer would point at that recording and say, "Listen, he's admitting a lot when he tries to intimidate." Judges dislike arrogance. In court, you can present dry fact after dry fact, but humans are moved by the warmth of truth and the rawness of recorded evidence. When the judge heard the call, his expression changed. The room, which had been a steady hum of procedural formality, tilted. The hearing itself unfolded over one morning. I arrived early, feeling oddly both nervous and strangely serene. The prosecutor's clerk took the binder of our exhibits and gave me a nod that felt like an old friend, acknowledging another friend who had arrived prepared. The defendant's table, my former company, looked thin in comparison. A small stack of papers, a nervous employee who shifted in his seat, and the CEO who tried to appear composed. But under his suit, you could see the tension. His hands twitched when he stacked his notes. The judge was an older woman, a few streaks of white in her hair, glasses balanced at the tip of her nose. She spoke in a voice that had practiced patience for decades. She reviewed the facts, the written agreement, the emails acknowledging overtime discussions, the registered letters demanding payment, the rejections, the calculation of interest and penalties, the recording. She did what judges do best. She focused on the rule book and let the story be told through the records. The law was straightforward where it mattered. Under local statutes, unpaid wages are employer liability. There's a statute of limitations, 7 years, but interest accrues. Daily and penalties attach when the employer instructs workers to perform uncompensated overtime. Those were the teeth of the case. I watched the CEO try to distract the judge with diversions, vague financial concerns, promises about future compensation, and that old trick, blaming market conditions. He spoke quickly, too quickly. Each explanation creaked. On cross-examination, his confident facade crumbled. An email exchange was produced, where he had explicitly discussed the nature of overtime with the CTO. Another showed the CEO acknowledging, in writing, that back pay discussions would occur. When presented with these documents, he shifted in his seat and his face went red. He kept glancing toward me, perhaps expecting me to stand up and forgo decorum. I sat still, quiet. The judge listened. Her pen scratched notes as if to mark the inevitability. By midday, the judge's voice was steady and unambiguous. She read the judgment in legalese that nonetheless landed like a closing door. The company must pay all owed wages, the accrued interest at the statutory rate compounded daily, penalties for instructing unpaid overtime, and the plaintiff's legal costs. She ordered immediate payment, not some installment plan. The phrase "immediately and without delay" is the kind of phrase a judge uses when precision matters. It sounded final. The CEO's face became ashen. He leaned forward, whispered to his counsel, and then directed an unforgiving glare in my direction. I felt something loosen inside me, a weight that years of nagging had held in place. There was relief, yes, but also a strange emptiness where anger used to be. Justice had arrived in paper and instruction. The emotional catharsis would take its own time. The company did not take the decision well. Within days, their offices were subject to a labor audit. The regulatory auditors moved through their ledgers with clinical indifference, opening drawers, scanning payroll, interviewing employees. The audit was not a show. It was a process that can expose cultural rot. When auditors start to poke, small clerical errors become glaring omissions, and omissions sometimes implicate people. An employee from the company called me privately that week. He spoke low, breath quick, and mentioned things I hadn't known: murky payroll practices, verbal instructions to staff to keep records loose, an atmosphere of fear. He apologized for how things had been handled and said the audit would reveal much. I thanked him. That conversation felt like a small victory. Someone inside finally named the problem with a human voice. Payment, because the judge had said it immediately and without delay, could not be deferred indefinitely. The company scrambled. There are few things worse for a CEO than seeing the words "judgment creditor" in a financial memo. Creditors appear. Banks call. Board members worry. Reputation, always fragile for a small company, can sour overnight. 1 week after the judgment, they paid. The check was for the full amount our calculations had projected: base back pay plus compounded interest and statutory penalties. The number was larger than the $50,000 I'd originally been owed. It was the arithmetic of time and law, a slow-moving avalanche of numbers that had become too large to ignore. They also had to cover my legal fees. I remember the clerk placing the bank draft on the table. It felt like someone setting down a trophy you haven't asked for but somehow wanted. I did not gloat. I felt a complex mix: validation, relief, and a quiet satisfaction that was almost private. But the universe, apparently, had its own taste for finishing touches. That evening, the hour after the ruling became widely known in the little network of tech and business people in the city, the CEO did something stupid. I get it. Stress has a way of cracking people. He decided to drink. He decided to let rage and booze collide. I heard about the crash the next morning. A late-night call, voices hurried. He had been driving a new Mercedes S-Class, a car that cost more than some annual turnovers for local firms. He was intoxicated. He collided with another vehicle at an intersection, spun like a toy, and eventually, a policeman walked him to the curb to perform the breathalyzer. The breathalyzer registered well over the legal limit. The consequences were swift. DUI charges, a suspended license, an insurance investigation that discovered the exclusion for driving under the influence. Insurance refused to pay for the damages. He lost a vehicle that cost his company dearly to procure. The PR fallout was immediate. Photos of the damaged car drifted through local industry groups and into the hands of competitors who had their own grudges. It was a cascade: judgment, payment, crash, conviction. It's tempting to call it poetic justice, but that phrase doesn't capture the smaller, humane details that mattered. I thought of the receptionist, who had once rolled her eyes when I requested extra time off for illness because it didn't fit the schedule. Thought of the developer, who had quietly asked me if he could annotate his extra hours without fear. I thought of the junior staffer who had been asked to come in on weekends to clear a backlog. For them, the judgment sent a message: labor matters. Contracts matter. People matter. After the lawsuit closed, life did not turn cinematic overnight. There was no parade. There was, however, a marked change. The company, chastened, adjusted their payroll practices. They issued apologies to staff and restructured some of their compensation policies. Part of me felt vindicated professionally. The law had recognized what I had been saying for years. Another part of me felt sad for the people caught on the wrong side of the company's choices, especially those who had been guided by fear to accept poor working conditions. I spent the money quietly. I paid legal bills, of course. I helped some people who had been disadvantaged by the company's policies in small ways, a referral here, a recommendation there. I bought a small thing I'd wanted for the office of the new work I had started. Nothing extravagant. The point had never been to get rich off misery. The point was to make the scales tip back toward fairness. There are lessons I pulled from this that go beyond the specifics of statutes and interest calculations. The first is this: dignity compounds like interest. Small indignities pile up. If you walk away every time, you may lose your peace. If you wait to act, the price can be high. There's a balance between letting go and standing your ground. I chose the latter for reasons that were both practical and deeply personal. The second lesson is about patience. People flash revenge as quick bursts, a public call-out, a sudden quit, or a viral video. Those have their uses, but there's also power in the long game. Time can be an ally. There is a sort of perverse beauty in watching arithmetic and law do work you cannot do with anger alone. But the final lesson, the one I felt most in my bones, is about leverage. I had built professional leverage, clients who trusted me, work that proved my value, and documentation. Without those, nothing would have stood up in court. In today's world, where employers can be shifting and promises fly like paper in the wind, records matter. Keep them. They become the scaffolding for justice. In quiet moments now, people ask me whether I feel satisfaction. I think the word is too small. It wasn't a high five in the street. It was a settling of accounts, a writing of a ledger. It was the knowledge that someone had tried to minimize your worth, and the system, imperfect, slow, but existing, had restored some measure of fairness. If you take anything from this story, let it be practical as well as moral. Track your hours. Keep your correspondence. If someone dismisses your work or offers insult, in the name of equity, ask for specifics in writing. When you are wronged, be wise about what you want: immediate retribution or a carefully constructed victory that matters long term. There's nobility in patience. So that's what happened. They paid, the judgment landed. The driver who dismissed me stumbled himself. The audit cut into the company's morale. People who'd been afraid found a little more courage. The world did not become a perfect place overnight, but a measure of justice had been restored. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something cold and satisfying in your chest, then hit like. Leave a comment with the most outrageous workplace slight you've ever experienced. Tell me how you'd have reacted: immediate fury, quiet burn, or a patient plan like mine. If you want more stories that scratch that itch, the taste of justice neatly delivered, subscribe and ring the bell. There are more tales where this came from. And finally, respect the small things. Respect your time. Keep the receipts. Because sometimes, years later, they add up into something that makes the whole world tilt back into balance.